Go live, and we are live. Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader. I have a special edition of Comic Book Addicts, I'm calling it, with my favorite Bat Addict, known as Joshua Hayes on his channel name. Bat Josh is his preferred appellation. So
Atomic
hi
batteries.
Josh.
Hello out there, world.
And
Atomic batteries to power, turbines to speed. Roger, ready to move out.
Josh and I have been talking with each other a lot through each other's comments on each other's videos, so it just seemed natural to try doing some hangouts across the continent. So I thought I would just kind of start by asking Josh some questions about his bat experiences. I think you've said that your very first bat experience would be with the um,
Adam
now
West.
suddenly Adam West Batman. Is that
hmm
correct?
That is correct, actually. I was a young tyke, and I remember I was up late at night, and we had this foul-mouthed babysitter that my parents would get. She'd always be on the phone with her boyfriend and that type of thing, barely paying any attention, smoking in the house, all of it. But there was one night where Batman, the Adam West series, used to air on syndication on the Family Channel, where I'm at, and it was about 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday. And as a kid, I was a huge He-Man fan. It was about the time I was born in '82, and of course, the booming '80s. Boy my age. That's what boys my age were into at that time was He-Man, and later on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that. But the Adam West series was on the Family Channel that night, and I remember specifically it was a Joker episode with Cesar Romero, and I was just completely entranced by his performance. And I wasn't breaking it down like I would today, critically speaking. As a kid, in terms of like high fantasy, good versus bad guy, colors, and just wow factor, I was completely glued to the screen. And normally they would air just one episode a night on the Family Channel. And then if you wanted to watch the second part, you had to go to the next night.
The next night, yeah.
But this particular night, I didn't know anything about there being like a Batman marathon or anything like that. But in my head, I just had it in my head, don't turn the channel because they're going to have more Batman on, like I hope they have more Batman on. And she's like, no, there's no other Batman on. I'm going over, recorded Days of Our Lives, and I brought it and I put it in the VCR, and that's what I'm watching because I didn't get to watch it all week, and now I'm here watching you brats. And I was like, okay, but if it's on, she's like, well, I'll tell you what, if it's on, then I suppose you can watch it, but if it's not on, we're going over to Days of Our Lives. Well, it turns out that this was just like maybe once a year they would just have, I don't even know how often, but they had a marathon on that night. And so then Batman came on, much to her surprise, and it was on for like 4 or 5 hours until like 1 in the morning. And she let me stay up and watch it, and I remember seeing Joan Collins as the Siren, and I remember Frank Gorshin's Riddler, and just that night I just completely fell in love with the character.
Wow, so
And,
in one night you just dive deep into everything about Batman and you'd never heard about it before, or very little about it.
well, everything about the Adam West Batman.
Right. But I mean, that introduces you to a huge cast of villains and some other characters, and a kind of gives you a strong beginning in the mythos pretty quickly then.
Yeah, it really did. And it's one of those things, too, where as a kid, now today as an adult, if you go back and watch the Adam West series, obviously it's intended to be satirical.
Right.
However, as a kid watching it, you take it very seriously. You're watching it through a different lens. So it would be the same me watching that then as though I, as a mature adult man now, were to read, like, say, The Dark Knight Returns or something.
Right.
Real substance, real maturity, more what would be in keeping with what people would describe as the modern day Batman that everybody knows and is familiar with. To me, this would be no different as a kid. And so there wasn't a divide between the two for me at that age. And then, of course, as I've grown up, I've become more akin to the Batman that we're all familiar with. But for that time and place, not really recognizing the difference because I was so young, that is absolutely the series that got me into Batman. And if it wasn't for the Adam West series, who knows if I would be today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my memory is fuzzy, but I think that series was my first exposure to superheroes, and just the giant pow and biff and bam, that itself I took very seriously, and it excited me, and it warmed my heart. It made me just love superheroes right away. So that brought me it primed me. It made me ready for when I finally actually came across comic books to love the medium somehow, I think. So them making fun of comic bookiness actually introduced me to comic bookiness and made me love it, I think. And I think in various ways, that's many people's first Batman. And so most people get it as non-satire before they get it as satire. I've heard Kevin Smith on his podcast talking about that being his first also.
What's funny about it, too, is I remember the first Batman comic book I ever read, which a lot of people don't remember the first comic they ever read. So
how soon did that come after seeing Adam West, would you say?
I don't know the exact delay in time. It might have been a week. It might have been 2 years. I'm not sure. I just remember being at a summer picnic party for the 4th of July, and they used to have, I don't know if everybody out there remembers. If you remember, leave a comment, because nobody else I've ever spoken to remembers this. But they used to have at like grocery stores and like retail stores these DC Comic 3-packs. They'd have like cardboard in them, and then there'd be 3 comic books in it, and it would be in cellophane. And the 3 comic books that were in this particular 3-pack, I believe it was Batman somewhere in the lower 420s, right before Death of the Family. These were the issues where Jason Todd as Robin was going after, they were going after a drug cartel. And in one of the issues, and I don't remember the entire plot, but there is an issue where Jason Todd, it's left ambiguous, but he pushes one of these members of the drug cartel that is beating a woman out of a window. And when Batman arrives, Jason Todd's like, oh, well, he slipped. But now, this may sound confusing. That actually isn't the first comic book I read. It just happened to be in that 3-pack. But the first comic book I read, it was a McFarlane cover. It had a red background. Batman was sort of more like a silhouette, and there was a female that was curled up against him with blonde or red hair. And inside the book, it was basically a very ordinary street-level story. There was a man who his life was down and out. He was going to jump off, the Tri-Gate Bridge in Gotham City. And then there's another one where a diner gets robbed, and it's about all these not ordinary, but ordinary events in Gotham City, at least, that are going on. They're very street-level events, and Batman goes and breaks these all up. And so that was my first exposure to a comic book. Now, strange, as a kid, that it wasn't like one of these big, super villains that was in it. But it did 2 things. One, it made me really intrigued for what the comics with the super villains would be like, that I enjoyed a book that was this grounded so much, even young. But the second thing, I think back on that book sometimes, and I wonder, because right now, when I read a Batman comic, I hear Kevin Conroy's Batman in my head, the animated series. But back then, I would have heard the Adam West series, and it just goes to further emphasize how, as a kid, you view the Adam West series on a serious level, because how else can you reconcile the fact that you're reading
those
a Batman
two together? Yeah.
where women are getting beaten and men are being thrown out windows and potentially killed by Robin, and guys are threatening to commit suicide because they become junkies and want to jump off a bridge. But yet I still reconcile that with the Adam West series and have Adam West Batman as the speaking role in that book. It seems a little out of Adam West's territory and comfort zone.
Way out of it. Do you remember who did the art or the writing on that book?
I know that the cover was by McFarlane. I would have to check who did the writing. I would like to say Jim Aparo did the art, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that makes sense. He was such a
Art.
long time Batman.
Yeah, yeah, and I do want to say Doug Moench. We just talked about the fact
Right. We have no
names
idea how to say
impossible to
his name.
pronounce.
I've always said it
Um,
Monch. But
Monch. Yeah, your guess is as good as
I've
mine
never
on
heard
that.
it said aloud by a comic book professional, which would be the
It's probably something weird where there's a silent and like it's like probably like Moane or
or
something
monk.
ridiculous. But that would be, off the top of my head, I do not remember, but that'd be my best guess.
So do you think when did you become like a regular? Well, actually, I want to back up. Did you see? I'm not sure when the Batman animated series originally came out, but you would still be a kid when that originally came out.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh
did
yeah.
you find that show as a kid?
1992, and oh, I most certainly did. There was a TV guide that had a preview for Batman the Animated Series coming out, and it was this blurb that was about this big, and I probably went back 5 times a day that summer to that TV guide and read that blurb 5 times a day, and every time got excited about just this one still frame picture and this little blurb about the animated series. But because I was instilled with a love for the character via the Adam West series, and by that point I had read some of the comics, and now my intrigue in this character was so just visceral and just real, and I was just completely bonded with the character. And then they announced that this new animated series was coming out, and I can honestly say it is the most excited I've ever been for anything in my life. Was the Batman the Animated Series. I don't remember ever having just that raw, sheer, just feeling of excitement like I did for that. I was so pumped up. So pumped up.
Yeah, I mean, I really wish that was around when I was a kid. That would have changed a lot for me for Batman.
And that actually had serious stories,
Right.
So, as it just took on a whole new level, and then I got to enjoy that series into my early teenage years. So, as a teenager in comics at the time that I was growing up, it was better in that there wasn't as much bullying at the time, and comics had become more mainstream than it had been for some people who had to
Right.
endure those types of things. But in my case, it was more mainstream, but it certainly wasn't common, and it certainly you weren't immune from some of the heckling, that might occur.
Yeah.
But I was very lucky in that I had a very close knit community of friends that I came up with, and we grew as children, and the whole way through into our adolescence with that series. So we grew up with that series,
Yeah.
and I remember being every bit as excited for it in 1997 as I was in 92. And when I go, I'm doing these animated series reviews today. And part of it is just drawing on that feeling that I had back when I was a kid. Every episode that I review, I almost wish when I'd started doing that I had talked about like my first experience watching it instead of taking it as just a critical. Here's my review and thoughts on this episode now. Because like I just reviewed I've Got Batman in My Basement, which as a kid was admittedly one of my favorite episodes, but on like a critical level now, it's completely absurd and awful. It's terrible. But there again, that inability to reconcile between what's serious and what isn't when you're younger. But
Still, with that, in general, with that animated series, you get to see some of the best Batman stories that have been done as a kid. I had to slowly. Well, I'm much older than you. I was a returned reader to comics when Batman Year One came out. So that's probably when I first. I mean, I liked Batman before then, but that's when I got excited about Batman.
It's
But
not
if
too
I
bad of a
didn't,
way to get
but I think if
excited.
I'd had that animated TV show, I might have got excited about Batman and sooner and more into Batman than I had been. I just sort of viewed him as just another, except when I remembered how much I loved Adam West as a kid. I viewed him as just another hero, and it
Mhm.
was only when Frank Miller came in that my ears perked up, my bat ears perked up to Batman.
Instead of your spider sense tingling, your bat sense started to tingle a little bit.
I was more of a Fantastic Four kind of guy than Spider-Man.
That's not a common answer. Interesting. Huh. Came
Um,
across a huge Aquaman fan at the comic store today.
oh, really?
Huge Aquaman fan. Not something you encounter all the time, but I always think to myself, like, for example, Aquaman. Who that isn't like a hardcore comics collector picks this book up? Because I'm sure there are just Batman fans, not even Batman fans, just enthusiasts or just somebody sporadically looking for a book out. Batman, instant recognizability, yoink.
Right.
But Aquaman doesn't have that benefit in terms of sales, where it's like instant recognizability, and that is
Well,
one of
he
those.
does have the instant punchline to a joke kind of thing. And did you ever see the show Entourage?
I've heard on HBO.
Yeah, and it's kind of a running gag in that his most successful movie was when he played Aquaman, the movie star who's at the center of Entourage.
Yeah. No, I didn't. I never watched Entourage. Shame on me, but I never
But
did.
Aquaman is often people make jokes like I don't know where, but I've heard stand-up comedians joking about the Super Friends, and it's like, what could Aquaman do? He had to stay in the water, and they had to find some water somewhere for Aquaman.
I'll tell you, one of the most compelling Aquaman moments. I just recently did a review for Injustice. And there is a scene, I forget if it's at the end of Volume 1 or the beginning of Volume 2, but the concept in Injustice is essentially, what if Superman still had his virtues, but those virtues were skewed in such a way that his sort of perspective on how to protect the world came at the cost of certain liberties for human beings and things like that. And Superman and Wonder Woman sort of impose their worldviews and rules on everybody and everything. And Batman's radically opposed to this. And there are different factions that form. But then Aquaman comes into the scene and basically says, you talk about the world. Are you talking about the land? Or are you talking about the continents? You're talking about armies not warring with each other. You're talking about people not going hungry. You're talking about people's ideologies being shelved for your sentiment, for your point of view on what's right and wrong, instead of letting people decide that for themselves. But hopefully you're not talking about the water, because the last time I checked, the world, all of your little islands are surrounded by my water, and I'm the king of this domain. The sea is mine, and you may be the king of the land, but I'm the king of this world, and the way Superman and he have, of course, this philosophical debate then, like, what really is the world? And does it apply to Atlantis and the sea and the ocean and that type of thing? And it ends up ultimately, Superman, it's sort of like The Godfather. He gives him an offer he can't refuse, type of thing. Really compelling scenes with Aquaman in that book. This is probably a shameless plug, but once again, everybody go pick up Injustice. And I know it's based on a video game, but don't judge it on that. It's really good.
Yeah, I know it's excellent. I've read some random issues that were really good, and I need to go back and read it from the beginning. Well, what I always wonder with Aquaman, I mean, they leave it vague. Is how many people live under the sea with him? Is it one city, or is it, 1 billion people, or 1 million people, or 10,000? So they never delve. Well, maybe they have somewhere where I haven't read, but generally they don't seem to delve very closely into that. Same with Marvel's Submariner.
Mm-hmm.
He rules over Atlantis also, or an undersea kingdom, and is always angry at the surface. But is there really how big of a civilization? Anyway, that would be a fun thing to explore if you wanted to take Aquaman or Submariner seriously.
You said Under the Sea, and now I have the Little Mermaid song going through
Right.
my. Thanks.
Just picture me as a little lobster singing to you.
On your
In a
throne in
Jamaican
Atlantis.
accent. So all of us underwater creatures are from Jamaica, man. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, well, that's cool that you met. It's nice to think that every superhero does have their diehard fans who love them.
Somebody.
But it's much
Somebody out
easier
there
to
loves
love
you.
Batman.
People.
Um, but I've certainly loved some obscurities in my time, or at least second level people. I mean, Swamp Thing is very famous, but it's still never the big seller, and it's always been one of my favorites.
There's a question for you. Swamp Thing. I don't know if you're reading the New 52
I am.
version.
I am.
Which writer do you think has had the strongest run on that? And I have not read it. Scott Snyder or Charles Soule?
Charles Soule by far.
Really? Interesting. Interesting.
Uh, it has more soul. No.
Zing!
Both are very good, though. I mean, I would read the whole run if one had time and were interested. Both are very good, but I like Charles Soule a bit better, and it's hard to put my finger on exactly why. I think Scott Snyder is a more calculating writer, and Charles Soule is a more organic writer, from what I can tell from reading the two of them.
Yeah.
And
I
that
love Scott Snyder's style of writing, but I can see where you're coming from in that some of the structure of it, not formulaic. I mean, I don't use the term, I'm going to use the term systematic, and I don't want people to confuse that with formulaic. Because formulaic implies there's something that can be pre-calculated and predetermined, and that's not the case. But it's certainly there's a systematic structure to his writing,
Right.
and you can feel the blocks being put in their place. Whereas with other writers, things just have a different type of organic feel. I definitely see where you're coming from there.
And his run on Swamp Thing is very good, but you kind of see the gears moving in his head a bit, and for the Swamp Thing, which to me is kind of a mesh of horror and fantasy, at least the way they've developed the character since Alan Moore, because I think he was a straight horror character till Alan Moore took over. But so I think that Snyder maybe isn't as good at the fantasy element. He's very good at the horror element, and he's very good at the character elements.
Makes sense that he'd be good at the horror element with his
Right.
American Vampire work and Wake and all that. Yeah.
And a lot of people say that essentially Scott Snyder is a horror writer. Even when he's doing Batman, he's a horror writer.
I can agree with that.
So he's a good choice for the Swamp Thing because it does have that horror side. But I feel like Charles Soule handles the fantasy side better, and he's definitely good at the horror side and good at character. And he writes in a way that, to me, and maybe I take this from the fact that I know that he was a musician, and I saw a YouTube video of him playing a song, but he writes it in a way that has kind of a musical ebb and flow to it, rather than these sort of plot mechanicalness of Scott Snyder, and I kind of like that for the Swamp Thing.
A musical flow to a story. You're the king of like descriptive analogies, and I wish I had your mind, because when you said bat stew the other day, I thought to myself, that's what I've been trying to say, and I've used like a million words to try to say it, but in 2 words you just nailed it. And like a musical.
Well, I've had my thinking about Batman increased by you in so many ways, so I would not feel that you're any less than. I mean, you are an excellent reviewer. I mean, I kind of wish you did cover other comics, because I just love the way your mind works and the way you delve into a comic book, and I think you really think about how it's working and why, and I don't know. I can't pinpoint something like saying bat stew or whatever, but
Well, shucks.
but time and again you do an excellent job.
Yeah, I might dive into some other books here soon, like we were talking about earlier. Before we went live, we were discussing it, and I'm on that verge. I was telling Sleepy Reader about
Black
how
Science.
when I go to buy a book at the comic shop, I've been thinking about expanding beyond my Bat Horizon. Now, I have read Saga. Now that I do have under my belt. The Walking Dead, I have that under my belt. Um, Not Fables, not Black Science yet, though I have the trade.
Okay.
But I've been thinking about getting into Fables or even Why the Last Man. I haven't read that yet. But every time I go to pick up a trade, I recently started working part time at a comic shop. And when I go to pick up a trade, because we work on trade merchandise arrangement, and every time I go to pick up a trade, I see a certain value to that trade, a certain amount. And then there's this bat demon on one shoulder that will say, you you can use this to get something for your Batman cave instead, and you can feed your real urge. You don't have to change. Stick with the same old. It's comfortable. You love it. Just do the. Then there's this Bat Angel on this shoulder saying, "I'll still be here waiting for you. Go ahead. I give you permission to be free and run through the fields and find something new to do." And we were talking about it, and we've agreed that the Bat Angel is Adam West with a glass of milk. Telling me how, part of being whole and part of, you need to be a well-rounded person and try new things. And the Bat Demon absolutely has to be the Kelly Jones Batman, with as many dark inks as possible and the big long ears, and possibly like a pointy tail and a trident and maybe some flames, maybe like, Batman Red Rain or something like that. I'm trying to cut the bat umbilical cord and go into other things, new things. So if I do that, maybe I'll create a side channel that's non-Batman reviews.
You'll be non-Bat Josh.
Yeah, actually, that's a pretty clever idea. I might just go with that.
Well, there is so much good Batman stuff that you could spend a lot of your life delving into it. I mean, so I certainly could see that. I just want to interrupt before we get too far away from it. I noticed we have one comment from Sherpanaut, who says, Aquaman is my favorite DC hero by far. He needs more respect. I have an awesome story in the works for the character.
Hey.
So Sherpanaut, whoever Sherpanaut really is, but he's a regular watcher, maybe he's going to become a comic book writer and save Aquaman.
I wish him the best of luck.
Jeff Johns did a good job of that recently.
Tell you what, I'll make a pre-arrangement. I'm willing to read whatever story he has at any point in time. So if he wants to send it to me for some editorial work or an overview or some thoughts, I'm happy to read it. Sounds like fun.
So anyway,
or when it's published,
right. Well, that Jeff Johns New 52 Aquaman would be something to try if you want to read more DC. Actually, it is a very good run. I was unexcited by the idea of Jeff Parker taking over, and I just stopped reading it, which might be unfair. I am enjoying Jeff Parker's Batman 66, although I don't pick all of them up. I pick up ones that have stories that I particularly like. I'm interested in. Like right now, there's one about a Batman robot, so I picked that up.
The cover was pretty cool. It was fun. And Jeff Parker, yeah, I've been reading Batman 66. I haven't been reviewing it. No reason why not. I just haven't been.
Right.
Sort of like my system cleanse is how I view that book. You read all these dark books with mature subject matter, and sometimes you just need that contrast. And so, I sort of oftentimes will read Batman 66 last because it kind of gets me, it's like a system flush in a way, something a little bit new. Although I do want to give some props to Kevin Smith. Jeff Parker has done a really, I would say, fair to midland job on some of the issues, but he's had some really standout issues of Batman 66. But the one thing I need to give props to Kevin Smith for is that while Jeff Parker's Batman 66 is a little bit more varied, and Kevin Smith's really, there are nuggets from the TV show that Jeff Parker doesn't necessarily infuse as much, that Kevin Smith has done a really great job of infusing, like the literal cliffhangers at the end of books and the sort of out there traps, and some of the common narration and introductions to some of the old Adam West episodes. I think it reads more organically like an episode of the Adam West Batman series in Kevin Smith's Batman Green Hornet. He did
Oh,
Batman
really? See,
Green
I
Hornet.
didn't pick that up because I was afraid it would just be Kevin Smith and not
And,
Batman.
and, it, and it really isn't. It actually reads just like an episode of the series.
Oh,
It's
well, then I have to get it because I remember as a kid, I managed to see like half of the episode where he teams up with the Green Hornet, and I still never watched the rest of it. And I was so excited to see two superheroes together.
right, going up against Colonel Gum. And
I really wish the DVD of now that Batman 66 is finally coming out on DVD, I wish it wasn't so damn expensive.
right.
It'd be like
I
$200 for the 3 seasons.
it's possible that I might already have that on
Advance
somehow,
order.
some way, but can't get into these mysteries right now. But
Oh, maybe we get a good discount through your under-the-counter job?
no, nothing on the strictly up and up legal, so to speak. Probably shouldn't put that out there too live, but
Yeah. I mean, I eyed the advanced order on Amazon, and I think it was like $160 with their discount.
yeah.
And I couldn't quite rationalize that to my wife right at this moment.
I'm going to place a disclaimer out there, though, now that I've mentioned that. I was not the perpetrator who acquired these Adam West episodes on DVD. They just happened to arrive there and be bestowed on my doorstep, at which time I will say that I unwittingly put them in my DVD player, and they happen to be there, and I just haven't thrown those out yet. But boy, I intend to do it sometime.
And boy, will you will spend plenty of money on Batman merchandise in the future. You can promise the corporate masters that.
Yeah. Boy, shucks, I am just offended at the dregs of our society doing these horrible pirating acts, and I'm holding it for evidence.
Yeah, well, I need to get a hold of some illegal copies in the meantime until I can get it from the library.
You need to view the evidence.
We also, so Sherpanaut is watching, and Kingpen PKR 316 is watching. Hi, Kingpen.
Hello.
He does some pretty cool videos, so people should check him out. Click on his name in the comments and subscribe to him. And when you guys are actually watching this video, I don't think Sherpanaut does videos, but he comments all over the place. He's obviously a great guy, and he's on Twitter too. A bunch of us people from YouTube are on Twitter. I try not to follow anyone, at least under my Sleepy Reader name, but people I know are fellow comic book fans for chatting about comics on Twitter. I don't even follow the pros because I don't want to hear them kind of promoting themselves. I just want people having fun talking about comics.
Right.
Anyway, that was just a side note as I was looking at the comments. Kingpen just says, hi, guys.
Hello.
So let's get back to drilling you about your life as a Batman fan.
Back to the couch. The Bat
So
couch.
you watched Adam West. You picked up a 3-pack of DC Comics. Were you reading many comics by the time you started watching the animated show, or was it still mostly TV at that point?
When I was watching the animated show, I was not to the point where I would say, an avid collector in the sense that, I had a systematic schedule and I was buying every single Bat book. Because by that point, Shadow of the Bat was being published, Legends of the Dark Knight was being published, Batman, Detective Comics. I even think the Robin Tim Drake series may have actually come out in '93, but it was in that same time frame. So there were a number of Bat books that were coming out, and I can't say with any real regularity that I was picking them up, but whenever Nightfall dawned was, and credit to DC for advertising it well, because if you picked up a DC comic at that time, they had these really striking splash page advertisements for Nightfall. Bane is watching, all of these villains have been unleashed, and I was very excited not only to see all these various Batman rogues, but I was very compelled and interested by Bane, and so for Christmas, I believe it was Christmas. I may be mistaken, maybe birthday. My grandmother bought me some Batman comics, and one of them, timed coincidence, was Vengeance of Bane, special number 1, which was his introduction. And at that point, that was, the animated series was already going on, but that was the sinker, that was the hook that completely then drew me into comics as a very conscious, full-time effort. I'd pick them up sporadically here and there as I was able to. I remember reading a lot of books, by Alan Grant, the last Arkham. I remember picking those up one at a time at my local drugstore. Some of the side stores and pharmacies that had magazine shelves with comic books that, tear to my eye, don't today.
Right.
But I would pick them up there at that time. But then once Nightfall started up, and at that point in time, my drugstore, I should probably say farm, it sounds so weird to say picking up comics at a drugstore. But at that time, they didn't have all the Bat books. They had Batman and Shadow the Bat, but they did not have Detective Comics or Legends of the Dark Knight. And Detective Comics was a Paramount book for the Nightfall run. That's where half the chapters were going to be coming from. So at that point in time, I had to figure out, well, where's the nearest place? And it was Walden Books. So every Friday, my father and I, after school, we would go. He had a bad back, so he would go to the chiropractor, and then he would have me go to the chiropractor as well, and they'd crack my perfectly healthy back into place and make my bones snap in weird ways. That I don't know how healthy that really was, looking back on it,
So you're getting your back cracked and reading about Bane. That's a little scary.
Yeah, that is timed coincidence for sure. Yeah, now after reading Batman 497 where he gets his back broken, my back started to hurt, but I think that was more empathy pain than anything. But then we would drive into Indiana, PA, and there's a Walden Books there. And he would, every single week, to his credit, we would drive the extra 20 miles just to pick up one $2 book and drive all the way back home. But he committed to that because he knew I was interested in it. And then from there, it was every single week. And they came out that way. Batman, Detective, Shadow, and Legends were, week 1 in a month, week 2 in a month, week 3 in a month, week 4 in a month. And like clockwork, every Friday, boom, 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 boom. And the routine just has not stopped, though I did have a 1-year span of time where I stopped reading comics. Altogether, including Batman. I still was interested in Batman, but I wasn't collecting Batman. I was irate that they brought Jason Todd back from the dead. Under the red hood
that you cut off all Batman comics.
All of them. I didn't collect one for a year. I stopped completely and was like, I'm done with this. There's nothing sacred. I can't, the impact. There's no story with impact anymore because nothing's permanent. Nothing holds. And that is the thing, with DC and Marvel. You're kind of shackled to take chances because you don't want to risk things with characters that other creators have to work with. And they have all this legacy. But at the same time, when you do take those risks, you don't want to undo all of them. And I get a little annoyed with that. And the minute Hush came out, and I was reading it, and it turned out it wasn't really Jason.
Right.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't read Hush. But it was Clayface. But he was posing as Jason Todd. I remember my buddy Kent and I were talking, and I was like, they're going to do it. I was like, because that was so compelling, the conversation between Batman and surrogate Jason Todd, who really wasn't Jason. They're going to do it. The idea's been planted. The kernel's there. Somebody's going to get the creative impetus from this to go out and do this. And when they do it, I'm going to be done with it. I got over it. I went back and recollected the issues from a year back. I just ended up making more work for myself than anything. But
once you hit a certain, you've been reading comics long enough, you realize every single person, every single character is going to come back someday.
Have they ever brought back Uncle Ben? Or
I think just in dream sequences.
Okay, thank God. That's the one that sticks.
Right, people say that, but someday I bet they'll even bring him back.
They can't. They can't. It's the only one that's left, and if they do it, oh, I'll cry. There will be a little piece of me that will die
I mean,
inside. They'll bring him back to life, but a piece of me will die.
they bring back Thomas Wayne, currently in Earth 2, if not
Yeah.
anywhere else. I don't know.
Uh,
Did I just spoil Earth 2 for you?
no. But somebody maybe.
Did you know the Batman in Earth 2 is now Thomas
Thomas
Wayne? Yeah.
with the red symbol. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read Earth 2 on like schedule, like religiously,
Uh-huh.
but I have read excerpts from it, and from what I've heard from everybody, I don't know how I feel about this whole Earth 2 Futures End thing, but I don't know enough about Earth 2, honestly, to really have a very valid opinion on it.
Mhm.
But everybody that I've talked to that reads Earth 2 seems to be pleased with it. I'm taking it you do.
Yeah, I've been reading it and I'm very pleased with it. But I think the writer is leaving, and I was kind of thinking maybe I'll stop at this point, but I always say that and then I continue on. Kingpin PKR said that he does enjoy Jeff Parker's Aquaman, and he loves Batman 66. Jeff Parker seems like a great writer for Batman 66, but when I used to read his Marvel work, I wasn't too excited about it, so that's why I didn't keep up with Aquaman, but maybe I should try it.
I'm going to step away for just 1 second just to go grab something. I'll be literally away for 5 seconds.
And Kingpin also says that it's surprising Amazon maybe has the better price. I think he's referring to Batman 66, the DVD
The
coming
endorsement. Gotta get. This is my addiction.
Have you drunk that much today so far?
Oh, now it's probably about where the midway through the label. Anyway, this is my third or fourth glass of the evening now. It's a problem. It's definitely a problem. And what's more of an indictment isn't the volume. It's the fact that in Eastern Standard Time it's 12:43 or 12:40. No, 12:49.
Right,
and,
caffeine at this time of night.
And it will have no impact, which would make you think, well, if it has no impact, then why do you really need it? But I drink it anyway. Like it's
well, let me know when you're getting too tired, because it's only 9:49 my time.
Oh, I'm gold. I'm good right now. Very good.
So, well, and have you delved back? So you pretty much started around Nightfall, which is about 93, 94.
Mm-hmm.
Have you delved back through all of Batman's comic book history, or just sample parts? I mean, you mentioned Jim Aparo, you know who he is. Doug Moench, or Mensch, or whatever, did all of his work before, and you obviously know a lot about him. I've heard you mention Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers' run, which I've on one of your videos, and I've always wanted to read that. Maybe I could read that, and we can have a discussion of that. That would be fun.
Yeah, their run's collected in Strange Apparitions. And it has some of the really classic stories. Really classic Rupert Thorne story. He's a councilman in Gotham City. Really classic Hugo Strange story that really gave a lot of weight to that character and credibility. Really classic. The Laughing Fish, the Joker episode of the animated series, is inspired by a book that was written in that volume by those two creators. So another classic story from that volume. But to answer the question, as far as have I gone back, not initially, but as I got into my teenage and early adult years, I started to go back and fill in gaps and try to get a broader knowledge of the history of the character. I've gone back and read. I've obviously not read Detective 27, but I've read, the reprints of it. Yeah. And some of the more important issues in the character's history. I'm a huge believer that to truly call yourself a fan of something like Batman, now you can say, I'm a fan of Batman's works and I really enjoy stories, but to say that you're a true fan of the character on the whole for anything, you don't have to know everything about it, but you have to at least be open to, when the option is there, learning something about their history. Now I've been lucky in that I have a huge reverence for history. I'm a huge football fan and sports fan too, and I like to think of myself in like I'm trying to become an encyclopedia. You know, I'm always seeking to learn more. And with something like Batman, it's kind of cool because to learn more, you read comics. You read comics, you know, and it's like, oh, well, that's, you know, hard learning. It's not like learning another language. You actually have fun. But yeah, I've gone back and I've probably, suffice to say, I've probably sampled just about literally not every Batman book ever written, but I'd say I have a healthy sampling, at least something from every era. But the collection, I've gone back and supplemented and filled in gaps in the collection too. And depending on what book it is, my collection goes back to about 1978, somewhere in there, 79. Some books not as long, either because they didn't exist that long or I just haven't gone back that far with that book. But I would say that I have a full run of Batman, Detective Comics, going back to probably the mid-'80s. And then before that, it's intermittent. And my oldest books are from the very, very early '70s. And one of the classic books I have that I really cherish is I have the Batman book, the first Ra's al Ghul Batman book by Dennis O'Neil. And it's actually signed by Neil Adams.
Whoa.
Just,
did you pay for that signature, or did it?
Gift. It came to me as a gift from my.
He now charges like $50 a signature or something along those lines. $40 a signature.
It's one of those. I have a mixed opinion about it because I know that's how they're often making their living nowadays. You know, like Adam West, his signature was like something around $50 or $75. I saw him at a convention, and one part of me is like, oh my goodness, just to sign a piece of paper, you know, wow. But then I also think to myself, I don't know how many conventions he books, you know, I don't know what his current living situation is, or so. But it's expensive. I'm sure you're not going to get Neil Adams' signature for anything less than something that at least makes you balance your checkbook.
And Neil Adams may feel, well, wait a minute, a lot of these people are asking me for my signature so they can sell it for a lot more money on eBay.
Yeah.
And so when you're at the level of a kind of artist who people can make money off of you, you're like, well, why don't I get a share of that?
And not to be morbid, but let's go even further. If I were an artist, something I might think is, I wonder how many of these people are hoping I die so that their signed memorabilia, like, increases in value. Like, you know, I mean, there are some of these people are waiting for my tombstone to be inscripted, you know?
Stan Lee may be feeling that way.
Wow, that's probably one of the worst things I've ever said, and now it's out there for everyone. Oh, well.
So, I'm very curious then what, you know, because I know a lot about what you think of current Batman comics because I'm an avid viewer of your videos. But what stands out to you from the past? I mean, for me, the first thing I always think of is the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, like that Ra's al Ghul one that you have the signature on, and that's a big standout for me.
That would be the exact era that I would go to. I think Frank Miller gets a great deal of the acclaim and credit for revitalizing and redefining and really maturing and pushing forward Batman's character. You know, Dark Knight Returns Year One. You talk about the top Batman stories. It's going to be 1 and 2 on most people's lists.
Yeah.
In one order or the other. And which order is which, it just depends on who you talk to. But I would say if you ask 10 comic fans, top 10 Batman stories, I'll guarantee 7 out of 10 of them, 1 and 2 will be those 2 books in one order or the other. But I think what really gets lost is that through the camp era of the 60s, there was a point where there was Batmania in the 60s and there was a huge hype and the sales were astronomical. But then with the fall of the TV show also came struggles for the character in print. And
I know.
So
yeah, I read about that.
The character had to be revitalized. And who, you know, when you talk about the character, the Dark Knight that we see today, like I said, Frank Miller gets a lot of that credit, and deservedly. But Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' sort of seminal works on Batman really don't come up in the conversation nearly as much as they should. There's No Hope in Crime Alley. I think of as a book that not only takes Batman to story to a very dark urban street level, and it redefines the concept, of Batman's origin with Crime Alley and being the former Park Row. And there's something very definitive about like something beautiful like Park Row becoming Crime Alley. Like, there's something very symbolic about all of that.
Yeah.
But now Dennis O'Neill's a mixed bag because he's told some stories that really fall flat in their face too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, Dennis O'Neil is a large part of his output is hack work.
Mm-hmm.
He was just earning a living, and he was writing a lot of comic books so that he could, pay his kids' college tuition or whatever. Didn't pay very well back then. But there are some standout stuff, and it definitely helps to have Neil. There's something magical about Neil Adams' artwork that, even though he has lots of imitators, no one quite else gets, in my opinion.
There's just something about bare-chested Batman coming in to Ray Kuggles' tent, and you're just like, yeah, that's pretty much about the perfect way you can draw that image.
I own Batman Odyssey. That's where, when you said Batman bare-chested, I think of his Batman Odyssey, which I couldn't even bring myself to read, but I need to force myself to go back and read it.
Grant Morrison referred to it as the hairy-chested love goddess phase. Or love goddess. Love God, not goddess. But you know what I'm saying. But yeah, as far as... now, I guess the clarification has to be, is it more like what eras of Batman do I feel were the important eras that are the standout eras? Or is this like you are going to go back and read a comic, regardless of how you objectively view it, where's your pleasure? If you're going to go
I'm more interested in your pleasure. So, what things jump out to you, either artists or writers that you just like to go back to or look at, and say, oh yeah, I like that little period of Batman here or there.
I really think that Greg Rucka's run in the early 2000s through No Man's Land and immediately thereafter is, dare I say, underrated. Yeah, I would say underrated. And in fact, that's probably, although it isn't that old, and although there are other creators, like some of Alan Grant and Norm Brayfogel's work back on Detective, like the Mud Pack books, and some of the books that introduced, like, say, Anarchy, and even like the Ratcatcher story. And then there's, what was it? The Electrocutioner, I believe, was in that run. And there were some books back in Detective that I like to go back and read. I really had a lot of fun in that era, reading those particular stories by Grant and Brayfogle. But I probably, more than anything, go back to Greg Rucka's runs on Detective in the early 2000s. I just think he has his finger on the pulse of every character that he was writing. In the same way that I feel Scott Snyder has his finger on the pulse of characters that he's writing. But I don't want to say Scott Snyder because it's like, oh, okay, good.
No, you can say Scott Snyder.
How many more Scott Snyder people, can be like, oh, Scott Snyder. But I'll tell you, one of the runs...
I think under Scott Snyder, Batman's selling better than he has since Hush, as far as I understand. Batman's... I don't know. I'd have to... Maybe Grant Morrison sold well, too. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I think Snyder's selling better.
Grant Morrison's selling well early, but I'd be surprised if he sold well in the middle and latter stages, because it's like with anything. His work is more like a 7-year sprawling epic, although I think in Batman and Robin, if I'm remembering correctly, his Batman and Robin title sold like hotcakes too. But a lot of that might be because he had Frank Quitely on the book early on, and people loved.
Well, and that's where I jumped back on Batman after a long hiatus myself. I tried a few random Grant Morris Batmans before then, and maybe because they were just random issues, they didn't make any.
You can't read any of those issues isolated. They have to be read in sequence, or His work is one that is very. You don't have to have a Batman PhD to read it, but the more you allow yourself to invest in researching the character, and you have to have a willingness to start from the beginning and work through, because everything comes together in the end. But their details and threads just flow the whole way through. Um, speaking of like artists and writers, I go back to. If people haven't read it, Gotham Central by the minute I tell you who wrote Gotham Central, everybody should immediately drop everything and order the books on Amazon, because that basically tells you everything you need to know in terms of the quality of the story. It's written by Greg Rucka and Ed Brubaker. It's basically, it has the heartbeat of a police procedural, where you're getting to know these various Gotham, cops in Gotham City. But then, within this very realistic, gritty approach, it infuses these high fantasy sort of superhero-esque elements into the story. Like, what would it be like to be a cop, just like a cop in New York or Pittsburgh or Baltimore today, handling everything ordinary like other cops do. But then on top of that, imagine you're in the NYPD and Clayface shows up. Like, how do you reconcile that as somebody who is an enforcer of the law, on top of being in a city where the general public views you as somebody that can't do your job because you rely on a guy in a mask to do it? And a lot of really rich and deep themes are explored out of those possibilities, and it's just outstanding. So that would probably be the one book more than any that I go back to and read the most, is the Gotham Central.
So I should seek that out then.
Oh yes. Oh yes. If there's one Batman story you haven't read, or a Batman related story that you haven't read, I would only warn, don't go into
one.
What's that?
There's probably too many to say just one, but
well, my hesitation there wasn't with the total number of Batman books. It's just that I say that with the caveat of, if you're going into it expecting just a Batman book, you're not getting that.
Right.
You're getting a police book set in Gotham City where Batman is a factor. And Batman appears, but
right.
It's intermittently. It is at its heart a character-driven story. Like, for example, there's one story where Renee Montoya is outed in the police force as a lesbian. And who does this and who conspires to release these details about her life, and who it is that's sort of playing with these puppet strings. It's just it's a riveting story in the same way that Batwoman Elegy was a riveting story, and Greg Rucka wrote both of those. Greg Rucka just has an uncanny ability to, in a very succinct and simple way, completely tug at your heartstrings with his character work. And it's just another shining example of why that guy. There's a difference between writing something down and writing as a profession. And Greg Rucka is a writer. Right. When somebody can sing well, they say, "Boy, she can sing," with like an A, sang, not sing, sang. Well, he can write. I don't know. It's already an I in there, but you know what I'm trying to say. There has to be like another way to say it for like a writer that can really write. He can write. I don't know. I'm sounding foolish right now.
Have you sought out any other Greg Rucka comics?
I haven't, believe it or not. I should. It's that Bat Demon again. It's that Kelly Jones Bat Demon that keeps holding me back. I've heard nothing but good things about him.
There's this thing, old chum, it's okay. You can go read other things, and we'll be waiting for you.
I've read about a Greg Rucka story where it's in the snow, like Whiteout or something like that.
Right. I think that's one of his first indie works. I haven't read that one. His Punisher run was very good, and I'm not a Punisher fan normally, but I really loved his Punisher run. It has incredible artwork on it too. And then currently at Image he's doing Lazarus, which is very good, but it's so depressing that I stopped reading it because I was going through a period where I didn't want to be that depressed.
Normally,
life was getting me down enough. I wanted comic books to be a little more fun, but I'll probably go back to. I read, I think, the first 8 issues. I'll probably go back to it and pick it up later when I'm in the right mood.
Brubaker too. Brubaker's another one that was on that title, and he did Fatale. I know recently.
Right. All of his indie work is fantastic. The stuff he's done with Sean Phillips,
Mm.
Criminal and Fatale, and now he's doing the Fade Out, and there were some other ones, Sleeper and stuff. Any Brubaker, Sean Phillips graphic novel that you see, you steal it from the comic book store where you work or something. I know, I'm joking.
I need to do something and get it. I think part of it too is I find it so imposing how many things I haven't read that I really, really, really need to read.
Well, that's
Um,
yeah. I feel that way just talking about Batman. There's so much Batman I haven't read. Like I haven't read any Greg Rucka Batman, so I obviously need to look for that and for Gotham Central.
Go, you won't regret it.
Because Matt Wednesday Serial has talked about that era too, and probably I think Oddfellow Thoughts. But I stopped Batman sometime in the '90s, and then I came back to it. Basically, I started poking around at the Grant Morrison Batman, and then started really reading it with Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
And then the New 52 happened, and then I started reading a lot more DC comics in general.
Here's a question for you. I've heard it, but I don't know how I feel about it. People have asked me this question, and I'm not sure how to answer it. The whole when Grant Morrison killed off Damian Wayne, do you think it's because DC pissed in his Wheaties whenever they went to the New 52? You know, Grant Morrison giveth and taketh away. I mean, I can see it both ways. On one hand, I can see where it's an interesting artistic direction for the story he was telling. On
Hmm.
the other hand, though, I can see you build up this whole universe, this whole new take on Batman. It's advertised as you're doing what you want to do to help bring the character into a new state and into a new era. And he sets it up, love it or hate it, he sets up something that's very fresh, very original, and we're moving forward. We have, you know, a sort of a lighter, more open Batman and Dick Grayson, and a dark, brooding Robin and Damian. You know, the complete opposite, the antithesis of what we would normally expect. And we're going with this completely new dynamic. And then the New 52 just happens, and you know
Right.
there are some people that would say, oh well, maybe Grant Morrison wasn't very pleased, you know, with what was not conspiring. That sounds bad, but with, you know, all of the events that were taking place, and maybe just maybe Grant Morrison giveth and taketh away. I don't know if I buy into that, but it's an interesting thought.
It could be. I mean, in a way, he had the status not just with Batman, but being kind of an architect of the DC universe for a while. And so I don't know if he was backing away from that or whether they took it away from him.
Hmm. The only
Because
reason I
they did
suspect
make
why
Batman in. I mean, they did make Batman Incorporated when he came back, kind
they
of
did.
a lesser Bat book by releasing it later on, and it just seemed in the periphery, and everything was about Scott Snyder,
Right.
some other Bat books.
Kind of took the back seat whenever he was the main driver, and then he kind of took the back seat after the
But I
relaunch.
do believe the claim that he planned to kill him off all along, and that he may have just killed him off more quickly because
That's
of
what I
this.
tend to believe too, only because at the end of that run, he really did leave a lot of nuggets and kernels for creators to utilize going forward. And I think if the
Right.
guy really was hard up to sort of cut off whatever he had created and set up, he would have found a way to brick wall them with the ending, much more so than he did. So yeah, I would probably tend to agree that there was more planned than anything else. Of course, it begs the question, and there's the whole. I remember when the New 52 launched, there was the question, well, how the hell do you reconcile that Batman's been around for 5 years, but Damian's 10 years old?
That drives me crazy.
My thinking on it is I wouldn't be at all surprised. Now, we've had 0 Year, and nothing was mentioned in. Well, maybe I shouldn't say this. I'm not going to say anything about 0 Year because you still need to read that.
I
But
don't
what I
mind if
will.
you spoil it. I can deal with spoilers on Zero Year fine. I've been
Okay.
listening to everyone's reviews on it.
Yeah, they go into Bruce's training, and that by no means do they imply that they've shown everything. There are certainly other elements to his training that we don't see in 0 Year. But one thing we do not see is anything that at least I can recall off the top of my head with the League of Assassins or Ra's al Ghul. I would theorize that much like in Batman Begins, because that's what so many fans, not hardcore comic fans, but just very general the Batman fan populace out there that's more familiar with the Christopher Nolan movies than the print Batman. They're very familiar with the whole notion of Ra's al Ghul, taking him under his wing, training him up, League of Assassins, yada yada yada. I would think that at some point we're probably going to find out that DC's New 52 is taking an approach to Batman's origin similar to that, not only to connect with those other comic fans, but to come up with a plausible explanation as to why Damian can be 10 years old. Maybe even before he was Batman, Ra's saw whatever potential was in Bruce as somebody that had been harmed by the ills of the world, somebody with a great potential, somebody that could take on, be his heir and marry his daughter and create the Al Ghul Empire would continue. And as such, you can have a Damian that's 10 because Damian truly did exist before Batman ever existed. I don't know. That would probably be, in my mind, the way that they would most easily reconcile that. But it did beg the question.
Yeah, I don't think they'll bother with that unless they're out of ideas and someone needs an idea of some Batman book to do, so they'll go back to that and retrofit things. What's the term? It's not retrofit, but retcon.
Retcon, yeah. Yeah, they may not.
But I kind of suspect they're going to destroy the New 52 in the next year or two and reboot again in some fashion.
You think?
Yeah, because of what I read in Future's End.
Right. I've heard so many murmurings. I've even heard murmurings about the fact that Batman Eternal. I don't know if you watched Superhero Enthusiast's Batman Eternal number 23 review yet.
Yes, but I didn't listen to the end. I started to get pissed off, and I left a nasty comment, and I unsubscribed.
Ooh. Yeah, I think I probably maybe know why. I'll leave that alone. But what I will say is the one thing they do bring up at the end is that on Future's End, or not Future's End, I'm sorry, Batman Eternal, there's the possibility of it not really going 60 issues, and then it might bleed into other Batman books. Now, I don't know if that's hearsay. See, I tried to look it up, and I didn't see too much online that was contradictory to the fact that Batman Eternal was going to play into the other Bat books, and the other Bat books may be at a point where Eternal is at the end before Eternal actually does end. So you might be seeing Eternal play out and things in other Bat books set up before that play out ever happens.
Yeah, I have read about that, and that just seems weird.
Hopefully it doesn't. I would just hope they don't, whatever they do at that time, with that timing, doesn't spoil Eternal in the end. You know what I mean? If they're going to do that, where whatever is occurring in the main Bat books is predicated on the fact that Eternal is completed or in a time after Batman Eternal, but Batman Eternal is not yet done, I would hope that whatever stories they're telling still leave some element of suspense in Eternal. I mean, Eternal's had its ups and downs, no doubt about that. But I at least want to have that intrigue, But we'll see.
Yeah, I really don't know. It almost feels like when they say, well, this is the next Batman is going to happen after Eternal, the events of Eternal, and then they have some other series that have mentioned they're going to happen after the events of Eternal, like the new Catwoman. I feel like it's almost like, well, we're halfway through Eternal and we've kind of lost interest in it, so we're going to skip ahead. The rest of us are. Why not? Why do that? Why not just make things parallel to Eternal till Eternal ends? It's frustrating. Like, one of my frustrations with Future's End, the weekly series, it's a great series, but it's basically all in the aftermath of a war with Earth 2, and everyone's lived through this war with Earth 2, and it's changed them, and you get hints about it all the time. And coming up is going to be a weekly series called Earth 2 World's End. So clearly we're then going back in time to find out what happened. Why not tell things in a linear fashion with these giant stories? And apparently coming up after World's End is now going to be a third series that Jim Lee and DiDio say is going to change everything and is epic in scope. And that's where I'm thinking, between what I read in World's End, that I think they're going to rip all the characters to shreds and then reboot in some fashion. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how they'll do it. Because they can't
Gives me
just
a
do the
headache.
new 52 or something like that.
Oh God, it gives me like sometimes more isn't more.
Right.
You know what I mean? Sometimes more is like less. Like they just oh. I hope that they just I just hope they know where to just stop and not convolute things too much.
Right.
You know, I hope whatever they have planned doesn't get so bombastic and overboard that it borders on being unenjoyable, and it borders on the point where you have to be purchasing 35 different DC books
Right.
just to know what the hell's going on. Because to me, the whole purpose, as I recall it, and this is my opinion, other people may not share this opinion, but let's just be honest. They relaunched the New 52 to make money. And the reason they needed to make money was because they needed to entice a new reader base. And the best way to do it is to give them a hopping on point. I don't think it was out of any creative inspiration or anything like that. So they're doing things, in my estimation, that are counterintuitive to the spirit of what the New 52 is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Which is to say, keep it simple, like, you know, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And
Right.
sometimes I feel like I just want to walk into DC headquarters and say that, like, you know, I guess they're moving to Los Angeles, and
Right.
they must have left some of their common, I don't want to say common sense, but their sensibilities about the New 52 back in New York, because they're starting to do things that sort of seem fractured from what the New 52 spirit was really, in my opinion, intended to be.
Right. I think it was for money, but I think it was a good idea to simplify things. And
Yeah,
there's
I do
something
think
wrong with their psychology that they can't stick with the simplicity. They're just dying to complicate things.
I agree.
And they're going to lose. They're going to lose readers rapidly, I think.
And I don't mean to say that they're when I say for money, I don't mean that in a negative way.
Right.
I mean, not completely.
No,
There's
I totally agree with you.
I'm like, whatever happened to the art, you know? But I don't. But hey, I hear that all the time. They're doing this for money, and there are times where I want to say, well, of course they're doing it for money. If they weren't, you wouldn't have comic books at all. You know, they have to do it for money. So I don't mean it in a completely negative connotation either. Just to clarify, because I can see where it can be easily construed that way for sure.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully they're not going for a complete reboot, but I'm sure they're going to have to do, because of money, they need to do something to revitalize sales. Because Marvel's doing it constantly, doing tricks to revitalize their sales. And DC is kind of always trying to catch up to Marvel financially. But just with Batman Eternal, it feels to me like this urge that they have to do a 60 issue story instead of a weekly series that has a bunch of 10 issue stories or 6 issue stories. Because they're clearly not really, well, in my opinion, they're not totally ready to do a 60 issue story. They didn't. It would have taken more planning than they had time for or something.
Yeah, initially I had the optimism, and I still, at some level, and maybe I might be holding on to the thinnest rope in the entire world at the edge of, you know, the highest cliff in the entire world. But I still hold out some hope that in the end, whatever grand vision Snyder and the creators had for this, they will, in the end, be, because at the beginning Snyder and Tynion were on board with it, and they were striving for first issues. And then as it became, you know, more of a rotating door as far as which writers are handling what issue, etc., I don't think it's mattered so much whether there's multiple threads in one issue or just one sort of isolated story in an issue. I think that we've seen examples of both, and both have had their highs and their lows. My hope is that though there are highs and though there are lows, whatever grand vision was intended, and no matter how many more of those highs and lows there are, that by the end, while the journey there may have had its bumps, we at least get whatever the destination is, whatever the end goal is. I would hope there's enough respect for the project that it comes together in an organized way, that it doesn't feel forced just to meet an issue criteria, that it comes together at least organically in the end, because clearly there's a reason for doing this. They want to get the Batman universe to a certain point, and whatever that point is, I would hope that Scott Snyder and Tynion would do everything in their power to make sure. I mean, say what you will about the journey there, but it has to come to fruition. It has to come together, and when it truly comes together, that's what I'm holding out for, and that's why I will complete the run and won't hop off of Eternal, is because I still have high hopes, despite some of the logical leaps and other things, that because they do have an end goal in mind, they will do what they must do to ensure that that end goal is successfully met. And that means, just like they started the story, coming on board and ending the story if they have to make sure that it works. If that doesn't turn out to be the case, then I will be quite pissed off, I will admit.
But you got to be careful there, because a lot of stories have slightly weaker endings. The journey is often much better than the ending, so you can't. I try not to pin too many of my hopes on pinning the ending, especially with a 60-issue story, because that last issue, if it ruins 59 issues for you, that's kind of sad.
I get what you're saying.
I wish they had kept it simpler and done simpler, shorter stories, and that maybe were like stepping stones, one from the other. But since they're not doing it, I'm gonna enjoy the journey. I'm kind of hoping that Tynion writes more of the issues, or Snyder comes in and writes some of the issues too.
I guess my thinking is, on a self-contained story where you have one writer in a reasonable number of issues telling a story. Yeah, some of the endings are weaker, but this book was, I have just the preview issue sitting here, but Eternal was advertised as a means to celebrate Batman's history, and you see so many different characters and so many themes from past stories kind of coming in, and I like to think that it's honoring those stories more than just completely taking from them. But beside the point, my main point with this is the reason for Eternal was to bring Batman to the status quo that they are looking to have for their future within the Batman continuity. That's the purpose of the book. And so with that being the purpose, it can be hard to have, with it being on a weekly schedule, so many artists involved, I'm sure it's a hard juggling act. I don't envy them having to go through that process, which would not be as easy as some people would like to make it out to be, I'm sure. But that said, the journey has, for me, had some highs. I think there have been some really strong issues, and it had some lows. I think there have been some really bad issues. But with the whole purpose of the book being getting to the status quo that they desire, I would have to think that status, because they have an ending in mind and they're writing to that ending. Like, that ending is what they are writing to. If the ending is bad, then it makes the whole justification for the book bad. You know what I mean?
I guess, but when you said they're paying honor to this rich history of Batman, as a reader, I get excited for that. That sounds good. When you say this book is about getting to a certain status quo, I don't get excited as a reader. I don't read books to get to a status quo. I read books to enjoy the journey.
Right.
I guess, so the status quo is just their larger plan for then the next books they'll write.
Yeah, I guess another way for me to say it is I, like you, am enjoying the journey because you're getting to see all these characters and all these plot threads. And it's sort of like I liken it to like a blindfolded grab bag where you might get an awesome toy or you might get a syringe stuck in your finger and you're not sure which one it is from week to week. Or a syringe labeled fear toxin. The only reason I mentioned looking forward to the ending and hoping that the ending pays out is because just in having read the interviews and as somebody, that, to be honest, I've been probably more disappointed than not in Eternal, I would say fairly. Mm-hmm. But I still somehow enjoy it every week. It's like right at the top of the things I enjoy somehow. It has that weird ability. It has me in that weird, like, I don't want to call it trance because I'm still thinking objectively about it, but I just look forward to it because I think there's an abundance of riches to explore, and I love to see how they're going to explore them. But knowing that it is honoring Batman's history, but they have also said in telling this story, which honors Batman's history, it is going to be the catalyst to get the Batman universe into the state for where the future stories are going to go. And knowing that that's the end game that they're working toward, I would hope that they would complete the story in a way that really satisfies and honors whatever that end game may be. Knowing that that's their goal in my head, I guess the best way to say it is I'm not reading it for that reason, but I'm optimistic about where it's going, knowing that they are using this for that sort of purpose in some ways, because it makes me feel like, well, if they have an end goal in mind or a target in mind, they're going to do everything in their power to ensure, hopefully, that that end game is met in the most creatively satisfying way possible. I have hope for that.
When I think about it that way, though, I get a little bitter hearing that these other books are going to skip to the end and the status quo is already going to be changed.
I agree. I agree with that. Like, we're getting to a status quo, which is here right now, and I agree wholeheartedly with that.
It feels to me like they changed their mind and then they just, I don't know. There's a fickleness
I'm sure
there.
That they have. From everything that I've read or heard and just different theories or facts or who knows what's what, but I'm quite certain that they didn't come into this with a complete, organized, structural plan for Eternal and all the other Bat books, because you can clearly tell the pieces are shifting very haphazardly. Almost spontaneously, it feels like at times.
I wonder if they have these meetings where they say, oh, well, this is kind of weird what we're doing here, and they say, well, don't worry about it. In a year, Tomasi will clean up our mess in Batman and Robin or something. Because it feels like he's the one who cleans up the mess and everything.
Speaking of Tomasi, I've been very much enjoying Batman and Robin in recent issues. I remember that you didn't enjoy the Omega Rises, and
right.
I can understand that.
But as a whole, I love Tomasi's run. He's done a great job. And
yeah.
Could be argued as the best New 52 Batman comic.
You have Batman by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo, and that's always all the rave. And in truth, Batman probably is the best Batman title out there right now on a very consistent basis. But that said, then you have Detective Comics, which very disappointing ending in that last arc. But Buccellato and Manapul have certainly had a real artistic flair over there. And then you have Batman Eternal, which is their big Stronghold weekly event. And Batman and Robin, really, even with the notion of a new Robin coming into the fray and the potential resurrection of Damian, with everything that's going on, it really sort of takes second, it sort of gets the short shrift. You know what I mean? Yeah. It feels like, in a way, and it's kind of sad because, to be honest, although Detective Comics' last issue was poor enough for me that if Tomasi manages to pull this Robin Rises, it maintains the quality and pulls it out, and it turns out to be strong, I don't know that I wouldn't put Detective Comics in third or fourth place on my list until that creative team can prove to me that they can tell a complete story.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the arguments I heard whenever they were on Flash, too, is they can't complete the story, So it'll be interesting to see what takes that place as my second place Bat book. But Tomasi's run hasn't been talked about a lot, but I think he's been doing a real good job.
Well, within the YouTube community, I think there are some people who are arguing it's the best Batman and talk about it quite a bit.
Yeah. I can understand that perspective.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily
because there's a group of people who were really, I haven't read Zero Year yet because I decided to trade weight on Snyder, but there's people who've been really pissed off by Zero Year and say, well, now because of Zero Year, I think of Batman and Robin as the lead Batman book in my own collecting, my own reading.
I have mixed thoughts on Zero Year. I will admit it became exhaustive. It really did start to lull in the middle. And when you read it in the whole, to be honest, I it changes it a little bit. It does flow a little better when you read it in the whole, but it doesn't completely cure that. That said, I'd like to remember that Snyder and Capullo's run on Zero Year did last a year, and so I'm really curious to see where they're going to go with their next story and event, to see if the sizzle's still there. You know, if sizzle's still on the steak. I have a feeling that it'll probably be impressive. But
did you feel that they landed the ending? I had the impression that you did from your videos.
yes, oh, I absolutely did.
And so that can make all the difference, particularly when you read it as a trade or you reread it, if the ending works.
I felt Batman number, I believe it was 33, if I'm recalling correctly. It was the final issue of Zero Year. And I felt reviews out there for anybody that wants to go check it out. But for reasons I mentioned there, and just in general, it got to my heartstrings. Like the beginning, it's almost, there's two phases to the story, which is just the catharsis of Batman finally taking out this overwhelming nemesis in the Riddler, who has had a half step ahead of him throughout this entire thing. And I feel like Snyder and Capullo did a really good job of organically making Riddler this very imposing threat and doing it in a clever way that was really befitting of the character. And you have just this awesome battle of wits between Batman and Riddler. And though some people would disagree, and that's fine, I do think that Batman ultimately outwits the Riddler to defeat him in that book. And then once you get through the very cathartic resolution of that story, then you move into some of the larger overarching themes about, you know, who is Bruce Wayne, who is Batman, how do you reconcile one with the other, how does that all relate into his view for Gotham City, and what does that mean implication-wise for him going into the future, and for, you know, Alfred going into the future, and Commissioner Gordon going into the future, and all these characters that have been juggled and worked with, you know, where does that leave them going forward, you know, in this whole journey that they're about to embark on. And I think that they end it in a very emotionally satisfying way. And so for those reasons, among just the typical Greg Capullo, FCO Placencia, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I thought, and it really redeemed it for me a lot. If it had been a clunker ending, I'd probably be one of those people that would be like, wow, completely didn't need to be told, should have stayed in the current time frame and told something entirely different. But because they ended it in a satisfying way for me, yeah, you're absolutely right. It completely makes the difference that they nailed that ending. And for some people, they didn't. Like, I know Ghost Critic was not satisfied with the ending of Zero Year, and to his right. I mean, and he made some very valid points about it, and why it wasn't to his liking. And that sucks. I feel bad for him in that way, because that's a long time to stick with the story and not be happy with the final issue. And but he stuck it out, and it sucks that he didn't have that same satisfaction with the ending that I did. Major bummer.
Still probably better than his sticking with Batwoman, which is even more painful for him.
Oh God, no! He got off Batwoman. He actually dropped it.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Me for not dropping it, but I have this sick temptation to tear it to shreds every month. I see it there, and I don't buy Catwoman because it's so bad. So, you know, I always say, if you want to know how bad Catwoman is, this is the best perspective you can have. I don't buy Catwoman, but I do still buy Batwoman.
There's a new YouTuber out there, and I can't quite remember his name. It has Ninja in it, but he argues that Batwoman is actually still good, and he still likes it. But he's the only one that I've seen saying that.
I'd be more than happy if you find him, if you want to link him below.
I'll link him below. It's something Ninja. He's a nice guy, and we've talked through comments.
And he may make some very well reasoned points, but I have no idea what those points could possibly be. And I don't mean that in a rude way or a judgmental way, because opinions are entirely subjective, and everybody has the right to a formed opinion. I always say I respect opinions not when they're had, but when they're formed. So in other words, if you substantiate it in any way, shape, or form, then you have every right to it, and you have every right to emphatically defend it if you choose to do so. And so I'd be very interested to hear what they have to say, because I know this: if somebody put a gun to my head and said defend Batwoman, I'd have a hard time. A hard time. I'd start, if my household was being held hostage, the way that we all get to leave, if I can defend Batwoman, I would just start apologizing. I
You
would just
think
start
you'll eventually
apologizing.
dump your Batwoman issues, or will you save them?
Oh no, I'll keep them. Mainly because I have the whole run,
Uh,
you know. But I'll say this: it's if it weren't for that, and if it weren't for the fact that I really enjoy Batwoman as a Batman-related character, I like I like her book in when it was good, in that it represented something very different from the rest of the Batman stories and the approach that they took with the storytelling for her character. Um, and I hold on to the hopes that the book can get back to that, and I don't want to stop buying it because I do want to support the title. I just don't want to support the creators.
right.
It's a hard thing to reconcile. Now with Catwoman, I don't care because they can cancel that book, and there will be a Catwoman book again someday. There's no doubt
Right.
about that. But with Batwoman, there's no guarantee of that.
Yeah.
At least I don't feel.
Well, we've been talking for an hour and a half or so.
Whoa.
Um, why don't I just? I have one more thing I'm curious about, and then we'll call it a night for this live broadcast.
Sounds good.
And just because we were talking about Catwoman and Batwoman, made me think of spinning out of Batman Eternal is going to be a lot more Gotham-related books. Will you be getting them all? Will you be getting what's it called, Arkham Manor and Gotham Academy and Gotham at Midnight, and I think maybe there's one other they're planning, but I can't remember.
You can't think of the fourth one, if there is a fourth one. Gotham at Midnight, I plan to get. I'll definitely be getting Arkham Manor. I think that's going to be a staple Bat book the way it reads. And so far as I can tell, I think Batman Eternal is supposed to have a heavy influence into leading into Arkham Manor and this upcoming Endgame story, which is Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's next arc, which is going to be 6 issues, leads directly into Arkham Manor, or events in that story. I don't want to say the story ends and leads into it, but events in that story have direct impact into Arkham Manor, which makes me think that it's going to really tie into the rest of the main Batman continuity. So I'm going to be picking that up for sure. Gotham, is it Academy or University? Academy, I think.
Academy, I think it's going to be a high school, like a private high school where...
We'll see, because if I recall, it's by Becky Cloonan, who's doing Harley Quinn.
No, Becky Cloonan is not doing Harley Quinn. That's Amanda Connor is
Amanda Connor
co-writing, and yeah, Becky Cloonan is the artist who did the fill-in issue that introduced Harper Row, and she's a very good artist, and they're going to have her write it. She's not going to be drawing it.
Who's the artist? Who's the artist on Harley Quinn right now? I'm having a Jimmy Palmiotti's on it. I know.
No, Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor are co-writers.
Right.
Amanda Connor does the covers, and even though I don't read it, I happen to know Chad Hardin is the artist.
Good memory. I happen to get the book, and I don't know. I could reach my comic box is literally right beside me. I could have just looked, but I have your big memory. I'll tell you, good memory. Wow.
I don't know why trivia. You know, some people like football trivia, some people like comic book trivia.
Who is writing Gotham Academy again? I remember hearing the
Academy is Becky Cloonan and someone else whose name I don't remember.
And Becky.
And I don't remember the artist on that yet, because once it comes out, and I'll probably remember.
I guess what it comes down to at the end of the day is I'm gonna try Gotham.
All of those.
Yeah, I mean I'm gonna pick them all up. It would take a lot for me to drop Arkham Manor. It would have to be pretty bad. It will not take a whole lot for me to drop Gotham Academy or Gotham at Midnight, but it will ultimately depend on a number of factors, not the least of which are, one, what are the implications in the rest of the Batman story? Because if there are direct implications for me, that's reason enough to stick with the book. Being a Batman sort of completionist, but the quality also is a factor. Kind of, I guess, I might be oversimplifying the answer here, but yeah, I'm
I'm
hoping.
nervous. I'm nervous about Gotham at Midnight because it's being written by Ray Fox, whose issues I have not terribly admired. And I've read a few random other things he's done at DC. I know he, before that, was a kind of cool indie creator, but he doesn't really stand out much at DC.
I can understand that. And Ray Fox, if I recall, I'd have to double check here, but I think he wrote the Arkham Asylum, the Arkham Asylum bits from Batman Eternal.
Yes, he did. He did with the Reverend Blackfire.
Yeah. And I have to say with those, two of the three I remember being fairly satisfied with, particularly the first one of that 3-issue arc. But I think Dustin Gwyn's art also did a lot to drive that forward.
Right.
Now, Dustin Gwyn's art, I wasn't as satisfied with in the last issue.
Yes.
Not that I wasn't satisfied with it. I guess that's the wrong way to say it. I was satisfied.
We're doing a comparative study to his best work or better work.
Right, it felt off. But
yeah. And there was that awful splash page with Catwoman and her stuff.
I don't know who that was, but that wasn't Catwoman.
Yeah, that was weird.
That was
I don't know how that got past the editor. They surely should send a page like that back to be redrawn.
Yeah, she looked and I'm not judging anybody with weight problems out there. I'm not saying that all comic characters have to be sexualized or anything along those lines, but let's be honest, there's a character profile for Catwoman. And it looked nothing like the character profile.
Well, and in a page before, we saw her crawl up through the sewer through tiny pipes.
Right, exactly. Sort of a reverse Shawshank Redemption type of thing. She pulled an Andy Dufresne.
Well, yeah, Ray Fox just to me, I mean, parts of that Arkham Asylum sequence were okay, but he doesn't grab me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the woman writing, I suddenly forgot her name, not Colleen. Anyway, the woman writing the Academy book, whether she is a good writer or not, because she hasn't really written anything before. I'll probably try them all also, but I'll probably drop most of them, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I only can read so many books.
Right, and then you branch out. You're not like me, have like a sick tie to one particular character that you break. You actually try other things.
Well, I read 40 to 50 comic books a month, and
yeah,
I'm constantly kind of shifting the list because I like to try lots of things.
Yeah. Right now on my total pull, and I buy basically all the Batman books, and even with that, my pull list is only maybe like 18 to 20. But with my current part-time gig at the shop, I'm looking to expand that to somewhere between 25 and 30. And so that leaves some wiggle room. But my thing is, before I start picking up individual issues of series that are already... I almost want to just go back and enjoy trades for the series that I've missed, and then pick up on issues that are by creators where there's a lot of promise. Like, for example, if Ramirez comes out with, a book, or the guy who does Black Science, what's his last name? Remender, yeah, They're just some names, Brubaker, that type of thing, Buckingham. Right. If they're coming out with a new book, you better give that book a shot.
Yeah, jump on new books and trades for things that you've heard good things about. I think that'd be the best approach now that you have the extra comic book cash from the job.
Right.
You might want to jump on Brubaker's The Fade Out. Right now, it's only one issue has come out so far.
The Fade Out.
Yeah, which is a period piece in Hollywood, a murder mystery in Hollywood.
That's interesting, because that's exactly the type of thing I'm looking for. I kind of want to get into something that I can enjoy amongst others in our community too.
Right.
It's not just about expanding my horizons and enjoying the subject matter, which it is partly about that. But I also like that extra bonus of being able to share it with everybody else.
Yeah.
And so being able to do that in real time would be an added benefit. Like I said, Some things I've been thinking about getting into. I haven't read Why the Last Man or Fables. Both of those are heavy contenders. You
Fables
know,
intimidates me because it's like, I don't know,
there's
how
20
many
volumes now.
volumes at
There's
this
20
point.
volumes, and I know it's ending too. That's
Right.
another factor is that it's ending, so
Yeah.
there's no catch-up point. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's good because you're building towards something that has a definitive ending.
Right.
An ending that the creators intend, so it's not forced, which is important. But then there's the other factor that I almost want to read something and get caught up to people. Like
Right.
Black Science or trying to think of other. Trees is another one I've heard good things about. There's a book called Spread that recently came out.
I read the first issue and decided not to keep with it.
Yeah,
I want to stop the broadcast here. Sorry for people that were sort of stopping at an uneven point, but it's just gone on so long.
yeah,
But I think Josh and I will be back at some point, maybe focusing, like having a book group type discussion about some Batman stuff, or maybe a Batman story arc or something somewhere that Josh recommends to me, and we both reread it, or I read it for the first time and he rereads it, and discuss it, and maybe bring on some other people who are big into the Batman into the mix if we can make schedules work. So thanks a lot for being the guest star on my channel, Josh,
hey, it's been
and
fun.
and thanks for all your great videos. So
Thank
good
you.
night, everybody. Thanks to Sean Mitchell, Kingpen PKR, and Sherpnot, who were our audience tonight and left some nice comments. Talk to you all later. Bye bye.